If there's one area where people go wrong when mixing vocals at home, it's compression. And this really frustrates me because if you understand compression and if you simply have a basic framework and chain that you can rely on, you can make even a microphone like a Shure SM57 or any other cheap dynamic microphone sound great within the context of the mix. In other words, it doesn't matter what microphone you're using or the gear that you're using or even the plugins that you're using, you just have to know what to do. And that's exactly what I'm going to share with you in this video. My go-to compression chain that delivers album quality vocals even when recording in a home studio with a cheap microphone like a Shure SM57 or any other dynamic microphone. Let's dive into it. Okay, so I'm super passionate about this topic because I'm a huge fan of using dynamic microphones in the studio because they are very forgiving when recording in a not so perfect environment, which is typically where I'm recording. For the longest time, I've recorded out of a basic project studio, and right now I'm recording out of my house because I don't have a studio. I'm building a new studio. So I love tracking vocals with a microphone like a Shure SM57. And just recently, I put out a video here on YouTube how you can EQ a Shure SM57 to sound like a large diaphragm, high quality condenser microphone. And just as I expected, I got at least one comment of someone sort of not criticizing, but asking about the compression technique on my vocal chain. Now, it's a fair question because what I found is people tend to either oversimplify compression or they way overcomplicate it. Honestly, they typically tend to overcomplicate it. And the truth is, you don't have to overcomplicate it. My compression technique for vocals is so straightforward, you won't believe it, and you're gonna learn exactly what I do right by watching this video. All right, so I'm just gonna get to it. I'm gonna play a vocal that was recorded in a corner of my basement, a crappy corner of my basement, completely untreated, with a Shure SM57 straight into a cheapo 2-channel USB interface. And let's hear the vocal track, and then we'll dive into the compression that I'm using on her vocal. Let's check it out. Okay, so obviously she's a great singer, which certainly helps. But again, we have to keep in mind, these vocals were recorded with a Shure SM57, which is pretty much a $100 microphone, straight into a cheapo interface, no preamps, no nothing, no acoustic treatment, just a super low budget recording. But a lot of the sound that you're hearing and a lot of the professionalism comes down to the compression that I'm using and the method that I'm using. So right off the bat, I just want to say this. I'm a fan of using 3 compressors on a vocal, and more specifically, 2 compressors and a limiter. And let's break down the compression choice, the settings within the compressor, and also the order in which they appear in your vocal chain, because that's pretty important. So up first, I'm a huge fan of placing a compressor before my EQ. Now, where I picked this technique up from is actually from the classic analog workflow that engineers use when working with tape machines and recording on analog equipment like analog consoles and analog preamps. Back in the day, and they still do this, they would typically compress specifically vocal tracks because vocals tend to be very dynamic on the way in while they're being recorded. The reason why engineers would do this and still do this is to get vocals out of the noise floor and to eliminate tape hiss when you're recording or any other hiss or noise in an analog signal chain. Yes, you can compress after the fact, and engineers certainly do, which I'm going to talk about in this video. But if you don't get the vocal in control first, you'll end up with a ton of noise that you'll bring up in post-production when adding more compression later. So by compressing before the vocal hits the tape, you end up with your vocal hopefully outside of the noise floor. Now, with DAWs and even the cheapest interfaces in the world, I don't care what interface you're using, noise is not a problem. I hear people talk about this a lot, and it is not a problem as long as you're recording with the gain set at a decent level on the way in without clipping. But here's a little secret for you. Because we've been listening to records and albums and music recorded with this signal chain for so long, in our mind's eye, that's what we associate associate pro-sounding vocals with. So I take that chain and I just recreate it in my DAW. And the good news for you is you don't need fancy plugins. I'm using stock plugins and some very low cost and actually very old plugins and achieving the result no problem. You could certainly do this even with stock plugins within your DAW. I don't care what DAW you're using. So up first, like I said, in the chain before EQ, I'm using a compressor, and there are only two things you really have to pay attention to: ratio and gain reduction. So when it comes to this compressor, I'm a huge fan of a low ratio and only around 5 to 10 dB of gain reduction. So right here is my gain reduction meter. In this case, I'm using a 4:1 ratio. And let's look at how much gain reduction is taking place on her vocal. Let's check it out. So around 40 dB of gain reduction. Sometimes it's a little more than that, like 8 dB, but nothing crazy. I'm not looking to squash her in this first stage. And this is compressor number 1. Again, just light compression, just to kind of get her in control before the EQ, because this compressor is going to react differently because it's seeing a vocal without any EQ at all. It's reacting all the low end, all the mid range that might be removed in the EQ stage. So once that's done, I dive into my second compressor directly after the EQ. Now with this compressor, I'm using a similar ratio. In this case, I'm using a 6:1, so very similar to the other one, still a low ratio. I'm not limiting yet, but I tend to hit this compressor a little harder. Again, at this stage, this compressor is not seeing all of the deep subs that I've gotten rid of on the vocal with EQ. It's seeing the final EQ'd version of her vocal track. And let's look at how much gain reduction is taking place in this compressor. And I can't fathom why you left me. So around 8 to 12 dB of gain reduction, slightly more than the first compressor. Now, I don't want you to get bogged down with small details that don't matter. It could be 14 dB of gain reduction, 16 dB of gain reduction. The whole idea here is that you're stacking compressors in series on your vocal track, and you're not trying to jam it all in within one single unit. The fact that you have these compressors all going on at the same time in series is what allows the vocal to sound transparent. Okay, so I don't stop here. After those two compressors, I have a nice brick wall limiter just to put a nice tight cap on the vocal track. Now, when I say a brick wall limiter, I mean a limiter with a ratio of infinity to 1. So nothing's getting past that threshold. And I'm not squashing the living hell out of it, just enough to tame the peaks on her vocal. Let's see how much gain reduction is taking place within the brick wall limiter. Let's check it out. I can't fathom why, and I wonder why, and I can't fathom why you left me. So around 4 to 6 dB of gain reduction, not a whole lot. Again, this is here more as a precautionary measure just to keep her in check. But the totality of these three compressors, or two compressors and limiter, allows the vocal to be nice and in control. It's also somewhat of an analog chain in a way, which subconsciously tells the listener that this is a professional vocal track. There are other elements, of course, like a great singer, solid EQ moves, but the use of proper compression really takes the vocal over the edge and polishes it up, and even makes an SM57 or a cheapo microphone sound pro, even if it was recorded in a crap environment. I know elitists hate hearing this, and it really pisses people off that have spent tens of thousands of dollars on gear and still can't produce a pro result, but I'm here to share the truth and to prove you don't need a whole lot to produce pro level results. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm actually gonna solo her vocal so you can hear it in isolation, and I'm going to one at a time enable each of the compressors and the limiter so you can hear what each one adds to the vocal track. The why you left me here, and I can't fathom why. I wonder why. I can't fathom why you left me here, and I can't fathom why. I wonder why, and I can't fathom why you left me here. So as you can hear, it works well, and each compressor is doing a little, but the net effect is a nice controlled vocal. So now, to drive this point home and to prove to you that this can work with pretty much any vocalist, I'm gonna hop over to another song featuring my good friend Steve Biasucci of my band King Kelly, where we recorded in his unfinished basement, again with an SM57 into a cheapo Motu interface, and let's see how it works there. The right, so in this case, I'm actually using 2 of the exact same compressor just to prove that it doesn't matter what compressor you're using, it's the settings that matter. And the main settings and the main things that you want to pay attention to are the ratio and the gain reduction. So these 2 compressors have a low ratio of around 5:1. Let's look at the gain reduction that's happening in the compressor right before the EQ. Around 6 dB of gain reduction in the first one, 4 to 6 dB, and then the second one. In the second compressor, we have around 12 dB of gain reduction. And then we have our good friend, the brick wall limiter here. Let's see what's happening here. You can see the gain reduction in this little meter here. So around an additional 6 dB of gain reduction happening in the brick wall limiter. So let's do some quick math. We have roughly 6 plus 12, 18 dB, and then another 6, 24 dB of total gain reduction. Now, purists will tell you that that's crazy and you shouldn't compress vocals that hard, but guess what? Pros have been doing it for decades. It's the sound of rock and roll and hip hop and pop music and metal and even some jazz. So the moral of the story is compression is the sound of vocals. We need compression on vocals because vocals are naturally very dynamic, and doing it in this way produces a vocal that doesn't sound overcompressed. It sounds very natural, yet in control. I also want to say this, it doesn't matter what microphone you're using, this will work very well with a condenser microphone. Even if you do have really nice gear and you record in a nice room, I pretty much use the exact same settings. The only thing you have to keep in mind is that if you're recording in an untreated space with a super high-end condenser microphone, the high-end condenser microphone is going to exacerbate the bad sound of your room. That's why I'm a huge fan of cheapo mics like an SM57 or even the Shure SM57B, because they're very forgiving, and in my opinion, they sound just as good as a large diaphragm condenser microphone, so what's the point in most cases? Good enough for me. If it's good enough for Bono of YouTube to record with, or Michael Jackson, again, it's good enough for me. It's probably good enough for you. And that's what this channel is all about, to prove to you and show you the way how you can achieve better results with the gear that you're currently using. The problem is, so many of us are brainwashed, and we are constantly bombarded by BS marketing, by gear manufacturers, and plugin companies. I don't want this for you. I want you producing top-level results today with the gear that you are currently using in your bedroom or home studio. And because of this, for absolutely free right now, I'm offering you direct access to my exclusive in-depth training, 4 dead simple ways to massively improve your recordings and mixes. Now, what makes this training awesome is you will learn my #1 technique for prepping heavy guitar tracks that virtually mix themselves. You'll also learn how to create instantaneous clarity within your mixes using any old stock EQ plugin. Finally, learn how to take control over the levels in your mix so that instruments stop fighting with one another. And on top of everything else, you will learn how to craft radio-ready vocal mixes using only stock plugins exclusively. Now, full disclosure, if you're one of these people that's constantly scrolling through TikTok and you have the attention span of a squirrel, don't waste your time and do not register for the training. The training is meant for people who are serious like I am about audio production. Now, if you're done messing around and you just want to produce better results for your music and your mixes and your recordings, there's a link below to the training. Click it and it's all yours. So hopefully this video has helped you out. Maybe it was somewhat of a light bulb moment, but maybe you want to learn a little more about how you can EQ a cheap microphone like an SM57 to sound pro when recording vocals. If you'd like to learn more about my EQ techniques when working with a microphone like this, watch this video. Straight to the point, and you'll learn how to EQ a cheapo vocal mic. Until next time, drink that, spindrift.